To honor and accept one's own shadow is a profound spiritual discipline. It is whole-making and thus holy, and the most important experience of a lifetime. Robert A. Johnson, an American author and Jungian analyst who followed Carl Jung's analytical psychology, understood the transformative power of embracing one's complete self. The Golden World, a glimpse of transcendence. At 11 years old, Johnson experienced a near-death experience during a car crash that rushed him to the hospital. In that profound moment, he discovered that the nothingness, the blackness, was simultaneously the ecstatic world. He witnessed the world transformed into gold through mystical visions. When doctors saved his life and the vision ceased, he found living unbearable. Through therapy, he was eventually convinced to remain in this world because, as he learned, without human faculties, he could not perceive the treasures he valued so deeply. Johnson struggled profoundly with navigating the outer world. He became known as Parsifal, the innocent fool, experiencing numerous delicate moments balanced between life and death throughout his existence. His exploration of the inner world became his salvation. His encounter with Jung proved pivotal. Johnson wrote of Jung's guidance, "Doctor, Jung told me to spend most of my time alone, have a separate room in the house to be used for nothing but inner work, never to join any organization or collectivity. Dr. Jung told me that the unconscious would protect me, give me everything that I needed for my life, and that my one duty was to do my inner work. All else would follow from this. He said it was not the least important whether I accomplished anything outwardly in this life, since my one task was to contribute to the evolution of the collective unconscious." At 54, feeling profoundly lost, Johnson traveled to India alone. After an exhausting journey during which he lost his luggage, he arrived at his hotel wanting nothing more than to sleep through the day. Looking out his window, he was struck by an extraordinary beauty that transported him back to the golden world he had experienced decades earlier. He had been granted a second chance, discovering that when we trust the inner world, it provides for us completely. The golden world exists continuously around us. It is a misconception to believe we must produce or earn it. It exists not in some distant place or future time, but as a state of consciousness accessible to anyone, at any moment, in any location. As the ancient wisdom teaches, the kingdom of heaven lies within. The shadow, our hidden completeness. Johnson authored several influential works, including He, Understanding Masculine Psychology, She, Understanding Feminine Psychology, and Owning Your Own Shadow, Understanding the Dark Side of the Psyche. His exploration of shadow work reveals that in our contemporary world, the water of life flows not in the external realm, but within our inner landscape. Exploring our inner world represents the most crucial task of our existence. This inner journey requires us to venture beyond the ego, what we consciously know and identify as ourselves, and courageously delve into the shadow. Johnson draws upon Jung's original understanding of the term. The shadow encompasses all parts of ourselves that we fail to see or acknowledge, everything residing in our unconscious. Many misconceptions surround the shadow concept. It's commonly perceived as evil, dark, and something to avoid at all costs. However, this understanding fundamentally misses the point. The shadow is not some detached entity separate from ourselves, nor is it the embodiment of evil. The shadow is an integral part of who we are. It cannot and should not be avoided, for doing so means working against our own nature. We all cast a shadow that follows behind us, both literally and metaphorically. This shadow represents the mirror image of ourselves that remains invisible to us, embodying those aspects we lack. The shadow serves a compensatory function, seeking to restore the complete wholeness of our personality. For instance, a criminal's shadow would contain not murderous impulses, but their opposite: sincerity, genuine connection, tenderness, and compassion. A shy person's shadow would hold assertiveness, commitment, responsibility, and boldness. When we display only pleasant aspects and highlights of ourselves while denying our authentic emotions and inner feelings, perhaps to appear likable or avoid conflict, we build resentment that flows directly into the shadow and gets unconsciously projected onto others. We must recognize our capacity for both good and evil. This is the only authentic reality. To deny our darkness is to reject half of ourselves. Understanding this truth, most of us naturally strive for lives filled with goodness, tranquility, and happiness. The shadow as friend, not enemy. The shadow should be viewed not as our enemy, but as our friend. It contains pure gold, waiting to be integrated into our complete personality. The shadow becomes hostile only when ignored or misunderstood. That's when it seizes control of us, because we refuse to consciously engage with it. We can either be led and guided through life by our shadow, or be dragged through existence by it, resulting in neurotic behavior. Holiness comes not from goodness alone, but from the union of both good and evil that gives birth to the transcendent. The shadow originates from our refused and unacceptable characteristics, which don't simply disappear but collect in the dark corners of our personality. When hidden long enough, they develop their own autonomous existence, the shadow life. If this shadow accumulates more energy than our ego, it erupts as overwhelming rage. When someone once asked Jung, "How do you find your shadow?" he replied, "How do you find the dragon that has swallowed you?" By definition, the shadow encompasses parts of ourselves that we don't know. We cannot simply discuss our own shadow if we can articulate it. It has already become conscious and is no longer shadow. This creates the embarrassing reality that others are more likely to recognize our shadow before we do. Culture and the divided self. We are born whole. Yet, culture demands that we express only certain parts of our nature while refusing other aspects of ourselves. We divide the self into ego and shadow because cultural expectations insist we behave in particular ways. This represents our inheritance from eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, gaining consciousness of good and evil. The shadow can be understood as sin, while the self represents the figure of Christ. Culture functions as a great leveling process, reducing everyone to the same standard. This means that some of the pure gold of our personality also gets relegated to the shadow. Johnson observes, "Curiously, people resist the noble aspects of their shadow more strenuously than they hide the dark sides. To draw the skeleton out of the closet is relatively easy, but to own the gold in the shadow is terrifying. It is more disrupting to find that you have a profound nobility of character than to find out you are a bum. Ignoring the shadow means ignoring our inner gold. Many people discover their gold only when suffering from severe or life-threatening illness. These intense experiences reveal that an important part of us lies dormant. The archetype of the wounded healer describes one who learns to cure himself and discover the gold within his experience. This typically represents the shaman's role, one who often becomes ill only to gain the insight necessary to heal himself and bring wisdom to his people, offering the elixir of life. The religious task, restoring wholeness. As we reach adulthood, we develop a clearly defined ego and shadow, establishing our system of right and wrong. The religious task becomes restoring wholeness to our personality. Religion means putting things back together again, reconnecting whatever has become fractured. This represents the essential work of religious life. We modern people exist in a broken state within ourselves. The truth proves difficult to bear. We resist hearing that something in the world matters more than our ego. Something must die, not our physical bodies, but our ego. Johnson writes, "Generally, the first half of life is devoted to the cultural process, gaining one's skills, raising a family, disciplining oneself in 100 different ways. The second half of life is devoted to restoring the wholeness, making holy of life." The Seesaw of Personality. Johnson uses the image of a teeter-totter or seesaw to illustrate our personality structure. On the right side rest our acceptable qualities, the righteous side, while on the left side lie those qualities we find unacceptable, the forbidden side. No quality can ever be completely discarded, it can only be moved between these two sides of the seesaw. A fundamental law prevails that most of us choose to completely ignore. The seesaw must remain balanced if we are to maintain psychic equilibrium. If we indulge characteristics on the right side, they must be balanced by equal weight on the left side. The reverse holds equally true. This instability causes mood swings or sudden transformations into completely different personas. Conversely, if the seesaw becomes too heavily loaded, it may break at the center point. This represents psychosis or breakdown. While we take our body temperature's balance for granted, we rarely recognize that the psyche also maintains its own equilibrium. This principle is beautifully illustrated in a medieval manuscript depicting the tree of knowledge growing from Adam's navel. On the left, the Virgin Mary appears clothed as a nun, picking fruit from the tree and distributing it to a long line of penitents for their salvation. On the right, Eve stands naked, picking fruit from the same tree and offering it to a long line of people for their damnation. This single tree produces dual results. Whenever we pluck the fruit of creativity, our other hand simultaneously plucks the fruit of destruction. We desperately wish to have creativity without destruction, but this proves impossible. Our resistance to this insight runs extraordinarily deep. The prevailing attitude toward goodness or sainthood encourages living as much as possible on the right side, the good side of the seesaw. But such a condition remains inherently unstable. The holy place exists at the center point. While we must hide our dark side from society, we should never hide it from ourselves. Johnson writes, "Of course we are going to have a shadow." Street. Augustine, in The City of God, thundered, "To act is to sin. To create is to destroy at the same moment. We cannot make light without corresponding darkness." India balances Brahma, the god of creation, with Shiva, the god of destruction, and Vishnu sits in the middle, keeping the opposites together. No one can escape the dark side of life, but we can pay out that dark side intelligently. The balance of light and dark is ultimately possible and bearable. Jung's great insight, the balance of opposites. This represents one of Jung's profound insights. The ego and shadow originate from the same source and precisely balance each other. To create light necessitates creating shadow. One cannot exist without the other. To own one's own shadow is to reach a holy place, an inner center, not attainable in any other way. To fail this is to fail one's own sainthood and to miss the purpose of life. We must strive not for perfection, but for wholeness. This is how life's joy emerges. It means embracing our complete humanity, our strengths and flaws, rather than pursuing one-sided goodness that lacks vitality or life. Johnson recalls, "I remember a weekend when I accommodated very difficult guests who stayed days beyond their invitation. I exercised Herculean patience and courtesy and sighed in great relief when they departed. I thought I had earned something pleasant through my virtue, so I went to the nursery to buy something beautiful for my garden. Before I knew what was happening, I picked a fight with the nurseryman and made a miserable spectacle of myself. Since I did not consciously acknowledge my shadow, I projected it onto this poor stranger. Balance was served, but in a clumsy and stupid way. One must honor one's shadow, for it represents an integral part of oneself. But one must not project it onto others. The shadow will claim its due in some form, intelligent or stupid. Projection always proves easier than assimilation. We can only live decent, civilized lives by acknowledging this other dimension of reality. We all possess the potential for evil. This is what unites all humanity. Those who deny this truth often become the very ones who fall prey to their own shadow. The consequences of refusing the dark. To refuse the dark side of one's nature means storing up or accumulating darkness. This later expresses itself as black moods, psychosomatic illness, or unconsciously inspired accidents. We are presently dealing with the accumulation of an entire society that has worshipped its light side and refused the dark, and this residue appears as war, economic chaos, strikes, racial intolerance. The front page of any newspaper hurls the collective shadow at us. We must be whole whether we like it or not. The only choice is whether we will incorporate the shadow consciously and with some dignity, or do it through neurotic behavior. The tendency to see one's shadow out there in specific persons or groups represents the most dangerous aspect of the modern psyche. This projection not only affects others negatively, but also harms oneself. Only by reclaiming the shadow into oneself can one assimilate it. It must return to where it first originated and where it is required for your own wholeness. It's common for two people's shadows to engage each other in conflict. This rarely leads anywhere productive, as both remain entirely at the mercy of the unconscious. To remain present with another's shadow without reacting represents nothing short of genius. Goethe's Faust provides a magnificent literary example of the meeting between ego and shadow. Faust, a scholar who finds life meaningless and contemplates suicide, has reached the seesaw's breaking point. At this crucial moment, he encounters his shadow, Mephistopheles. Through their relationship, Faust is saved from lifelessness and becomes capable of passion, while Mephistopheles discovers his capacity for love. Love is the one word in our Western tradition adequate to describe this synthesis of ego and shadow. The gold in the shadow. One of the most challenging concepts to grasp is that we often refuse to accept our noble traits, instead finding shadow substitutes for them. People are as frightened of their capacity for nobility as of their darkest sides. If you find the gold in someone, he will resist it to the last ounce of his strength. This is why we indulge in hero worship so often. All our energy resides in our shadow, and ignoring it leaves us feeling lifeless, exhausted, and lazy. A confrontation with one's shadow fills us with energy and stamina that we can use for daily tasks and work. Johnson shares, "A wise woman once showed me how to generate more energy when I complained that I was exhausted before lecturing. She instructed me to go to a private room just before the talk, take a towel, dampen it so it would be very heavy, then throw the towel, wrapped up into a ball, at the floor as hard as I could, and shout. I felt infinitely foolish doing this, for it was not my style. But when I walked out to the lecture platform after such an exercise, there was fire in my eyes. I had energy and stamina and voice. I did a courteous, well-structured lecture. The shadow backed me, but did not overwhelm me. Parrots learn profanity more easily than common phrases, because we utter our curses with such vigor. The parrot doesn't understand the meaning of these words, but he perceives the energy invested in them. Even animals can detect the power we have hidden in the shadow. In middle age, one grows tired of the involuntary journeys between the two ends of the seesaw. To our surprise, that middle ground proves not to be the grey compromise we feared, but the place of ecstasy and joy. If we learn to harness the shadow's energy correctly, it can set the stage for an entirely new phase of life. Shadow rituals and symbolic expression. In a shadow ritual, one must identify one of the left-hand contents and give it expression in a way that doesn't damage the right-hand personality. One can offer sacrifice in multiple ways, such as writing the shadow material down and then burning the paper. A symbolic or ceremonial ritual affects us as powerfully as any actual event, provided it holds meaning for us. All healthy societies maintain rich ceremonial lives to express their shadow symbolically through fasting, sacrifice, sexual abstention, and other practices. We must acknowledge the whole of reality, destruction and creation, evil and redemption. Our fondness for light blinds us to greater reality and prevents us from achieving this larger vision of wholeness. Paradox, the water of life. Paradox represents the water of life we desperately need in our modern world. All great myths provide instructions on this subject and remind us that treasure will be found in the least likely places. Strangely, the best often emerges from the most neglected quarters. We will go to almost any length to avoid this painful paradox, but in that refusal, we confine ourselves to the useless experience of contradiction. Contradiction brings the crushing burden of meaninglessness. One can endure any suffering if it has meaning, but meaninglessness proves unbearable. Contradiction remains barren and destructive, yet paradox proves creative. It represents a powerful embracing of reality. Every human experience can be expressed in terms of paradox. Day becomes comprehensible only in contrast to night. Masculinity holds relevance only in contrast to femininity. Activity gains meaning only in relation to rest. Up becomes possible only in the presence of down. Where would I be without you? Where does joy exist without the boundary of sobriety? To advance from opposition, always a quarrel, to paradox, always wholly, requires a leap of consciousness. That leap carries us through the chaos of middle age and provides a vista that enlightens our remaining years. Winning and losing, eating and fasting, earning and giving, these are not opposites but are all necessary to the human condition. Every one of us lives within this contradiction. So what do we do with this apparently insufferable contradiction? This question essentially underlies every neurotic dissociation and psychological problem. If we approach the question incorrectly, we become bound in neurotic paralysis, where we can do nothing, we can neither act nor be still. This is where many people find themselves, and their suffering intensifies. Danish philosopher Kierkegaard expresses this as exemplifying the life of the aesthete who chases pleasure but is struck with despair. He writes, "I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered to ride. The motion is too violent. I can't be bothered to walk. It's strenuous. I can't be bothered to lie down, for either I'd have to stay lying down and that I can't be bothered with, or I'd have to get up again and I can't be bothered with that either. In short, I just can't be bothered." Kierkegaard also believes that paradox offers the solution to despair, which can only be discovered by taking the leap of faith toward God. To consider one way of action profane and another sacred represents a terrible misuse of language. This is a flaming, flagrant error and the source of most neurotic suffering in humankind. Religion bridges or heals. It restores and reconciles the oppositions that have been torturing each of us. It helps us move from contradiction, that painful condition where things oppose each other, to the realm of paradox, where we can simultaneously entertain two contradictory notions and give them equal dignity. English poet William Blake also spoke about the need to reconcile both light and dark aspects of the self. He said we should go to heaven for form and to hell for energy and marry the two. Most people spend their entire life energy supporting the war of opposites within themselves, which brings only despair. In the miracle of paradox, it becomes good to win, it also becomes good to lose. It is good to have, it is also good not to have. Each represents a reality, a truth. To remain loyal to paradox is to earn the right to wholeness. Fanaticism always signals that one has adopted one of a pair of opposites at the expense of the other. The high energy of fanaticism represents a frantic effort to keep one half of truth at bay while the other half takes control. This always yields a brittle personality characterized by always being right. The shadow and spiritual experience. But what does paradox have to do with the shadow? It has everything to do with the shadow. For there can be no paradox, that sublime place of reconciliation, until one has owned one's shadow and drawn it up to a place of dignity and worth. To own one's shadow is to prepare the ground for spiritual experience. The divine progression follows this path, conflict to paradox to revelation. Who doesn't spend considerable time debating whether to tackle disciplined tasks or to procrastinate a bit longer in dreamy nowhere? Neither choice is inherently holy, but exactly in the paradox between them lies the holy place. To find oneself in a situation with no way out, or in a conflict with no solution, represents the classical beginning of individuation or self-realization. In this state, the unconscious creates the hopeless conflict to put ego consciousness against the wall, forcing us to realize that whatever we do is wrong. This becomes an act of humility that invites us to see beyond the ego toward that which is greater than ourselves. The Mandala and Mandorla, symbols of wholeness. We know that the Mandala represents the holy circle, symbolizing wholeness, the self. Mandalas are devices that remind us of our unity with God and with all living things. In Tibet, a teacher often draws a mandala for his student and leaves him to meditate on this symbol for many years before providing the next step of instruction. The Mandorla, however, represents an idea rarely discussed. The Mandorla also has a healing effect, but its form differs somewhat. It is an almond-shaped segment created when two circles partly overlap. This symbol signifies nothing less than the overlap of the opposites we have been investigating. It instructs us how to engage in reconciliation. We often see Christ or the Virgin Mary positioned in its center. By definition, Christ himself represents the intersection of the divine and human. He serves as the prototype for reconciling opposites and our guide out of the realm of conflict and duality. When one grows tired or discouraged by life to the point of being unable to bear living, the Mandorla shows what one may do. When the most Herculean efforts and finest discipline no longer keep life's painful contradictions at bay, we all need the Mandorla. Our own healing proceeds from that overlap of what we call good and evil, light and dark. It is not the light element alone that heals. The place where light and dark begin to touch represents the most profound religious experience we can have in life. We like to think that stories are based on the triumph of good over evil, but the deeper truth is that good and evil are superseded and the two become one. When one truly becomes both a citizen of heaven and earth, one finally realizes that there was only one circle all the time. This represents the fulfillment of the Christian goal. The two circles were only the optical illusion of our capacity and need to see things double. If one creates a mandorla in the privacy of one's interior life, it is heard for more than 1,000 miles. People often ask Jung, "Will we make it?" referring to the cataclysm of our time. He always replied, "If enough people will do their inner work." The acknowledgement of one's shadow diminishes shadow projection and helps contribute less to the general darkness of the world by not adding to the collective shadow that fuels war, division, and strife. But we also prepare the way for the Mandorla, that ultimate place of wholeness in one's inner life, the great price of human consciousness. In the Four Quartets, T.S. Eliot writes, "The fire and the rose are one. By overlapping the two elements of fire and flower, he creates a mandorla. We are pleased to the depth of our soul to be told that the fire of transformation and the flower of rebirth are one and the same.